Hey everybody, what is going on? So in this section, we are going to show you how you can pitch your product or service using some of the simplest and most effective ways to pitch. And this is also going to be an introduction to the persuasion formula. But don't worry, we're going to dive into all the details right here. Now, the first thing we're going to cover when it comes to pitching is that you want to get your one sentence pitch. And outside of this course, a lot of people call this the elevator pitch, or, it's just a simple way to explain clearly what value you bring to other people so people can determine whether or not they are interested in whatever it is that you have to say. Now, if you can't get your one sentence pitch down, then no one's really going to listen to you. And so as it relates to a sales call, sometimes in the beginning of the conversation, a prospect might ask you, so what do you do? And then that's when you want to insert your one sentence pitch so that you can continue on with the sales meeting, ensuring that they're actually interested in what you have. Now, if they don't ask you in the beginning of the meeting, towards the end of the meeting, you're going to have an opportunity to start talking about your product or service after you have listened to all of the prospect's pain. And then from there, you can use your one sentence pitch to get them more interested in hearing more about whatever it is that you want to offer to them. So there are going to be many different occasions on when to use your one sentence pitch. So you're going to find that when you're talking to a prospect, you're going to clearly see when that's going to happen, whether it's the beginning, middle, or end of a sales meeting. Now, to begin the one sentence pitch, we first actually have to talk about the sales legacy pillars, right? So we talked about this throughout the entire course, where there's going to be three main pillars when it comes to sales, and that is your ideal customer, your product or service, and what value you're bringing to your customer, right? And so essentially all businesses can be broken down into these three fundamental elements. And so when you're pitching, all you got to do is clearly show how you serve each of these pillars in just one sentence. And how we're going to do that is we got the simple formula called the one sentence pitch, right? And it's basically I help X achieve Y by doing Z, right? X, Y, Z, three different core elements. And as you know, these three elements are going to be the sales legacy pillars, from the ideal customer, right? Who your target audience is, your potential prospects, basically who you want to buy your product or service. And then the why part of it is going to be what value you're bringing to that specific individual. And lastly, the Z is going to be your specific product or service, meaning how is it that you're going to achieve value for your customer with your product or service, right? So I help X achieve Y by Z. And no matter how complex you think your product or service is, you really need to break it down into one sentence like this, because you're going to be able to clearly demonstrate whether or not you're providing value for your ideal customer, and you're giving that customer a taste of what you do so they have a better understanding of whether or not they should continue the meeting. Now, let's go ahead and give you some examples of the one sentence pitch. So again, the formula is I help X achieve Y by doing Z. And so it could be something like, hey, I help B2B startups generate more meetings by handling their cold email outbound lead generation. So in that example, let's say you have an agency that is a cold email lead generation company. You say, hey, I specifically help B2B startups generate more meetings by handling their cold emailing outbound lead generation strategy, and I actually do that for them, right? It's very clear on what you do. So another example I'm just gonna make up on the fly is I help e-commerce startup brands generate more sales by optimizing their Shopify profile page. Another example could be I help internet personalities build their email list by doing their Facebook ads. So there's pretty much an infinite ways you can spin this formula, but you just want to make sure that you're using it specifically for your product or service. And it's very simple, right? Know who you're selling your product or service to, understand what value you're generating for that customer, and how exactly you're doing that in terms of what product or service you're trying to sell. Okay, some more examples so you get a really better understanding of how this works, right? I help fitness personalities generate more online sales by scaling their Facebook ads, right? Very simple formula you can apply to your business. Another example, I help everyday people lose weight and become more healthy by creating a custom fitness and nutrition plan, right? You don't have to be a startup, you don't have to be an agency, you could be a coach or a nutrition coach or a fitness coach, and you could apply this formula as well. So now that you understand how to pitch your product or service using the one sentence formula, we're now going to go over the persuasion formula. So you can use this and in almost any situation, whether it's business or life, and it's going to go a little bit more in depth. After you do your one sentence pitch, people are going to be curious about learning more about your product or service, and this is the formula you're going to use to present your product or service, and it's going to work no matter what product or service you have, no matter what industry. It's pretty much plug and play. So let's go ahead and dive into the persuasion formula. All right, so the persuasion formula is going to have 3 core elements, and that is you're going to talk about the challenge that your prospects are facing. Then you're going to come in with the solution, meaning your product or service is a solution to that challenge. And then you're going to talk about why it's important, why your product or service is better or different than everybody else, right? So challenge, solution, and why. It pretty much goes in that order, like 1, 2, 3. So let's go ahead and dive deeper on how this works. So the persuasion formula, again, you want to start with the challenge. What pains, what problems your prospects are facing, what obstacles are in their way when they're trying to reach their goals, and essentially what is their current situation, right? And typically people's current situation is not the place they want to be. They got somewhere to go. They want to elevate their business, their life, whatever it is. So once you understand clearly what the problem is, and you do understand their problems at this point, because throughout the entire sales meeting, you're pretty much asking questions to understand a customer's pain points and their business challenges so that you can position your product or service as a solution, right? And so your solution just so happens, and that's very intentional, you solve the prospect's pain, and you're basically like a doctor making their pain go away. And you're pretty much helping them identify their current situation and their ideal situation, and you're trying to make it seem like your product or service is going to help them get to where they want to be. And when it comes to why, you want to talk about why your solution is going to be very important for that specific individual. This is where you really want to appeal to their emotions and really clearly, you want them to clearly understand why they should choose you versus anybody else that is your competitor or alternative, right? Now let's go ahead and give you an example. So let's say a challenge that most people have in sales is that they want to generate more leads, but they don't know where to begin, right? Because if they don't know how to generate leads, how can they close deals? So one solution that they can go, and I'm going to use Sales Legacy as this example, is Sales Legacy will teach you everything you need to know about sales, from sales strategy, sales skills, and lead generation. So if a business wants to generate more leads, well, Sales Legacy is going to show you how to generate more leads, and why this is going to be important for you, especially if you're, let's say, an entrepreneur or a salesperson, is that if you're a salesperson, you're going to hit your quota and you're going to grow your business, right? And if you're an entrepreneur, you're going to generate more income or more revenue for your business, and whatever dreams that you have when it comes to your professional life, we can make that a reality by helping you generate more leads and then teaching you everything you need to know to close the deal. So that's just an example of how I would use the persuasion formula to try to sell Sales Legacy, but you can see that you can pretty much use this for any product, service in any industry. A note, something that you gotta know is that the reason for why you're spending 80% of your time listening during a sales meeting and 20% of the time talking is because you really need to understand what the person's pains are. So when you're using, let's say, a persuasion formula like this, you're only giving your solution once you understand the prospect's pain. If you do not understand their pain and their challenges and where they want to go, it does not matter what product or service you're selling, no matter how good you believe it is, because if you're not solving the other person's pain, you're not generating value for that customer, and if they're not able to see that value, they're not going to pay you any money for your product or service. So that's why you really need to spend 80% of the time listening and really fully understanding the prospect's situation, and then from there you're going to spend 20% of the time talking and pitching and telling your prospect why they should invest in your product or service. And the reason for that is because you only want to pitch if you understand the prospect's pain. So this is why you pretty much never want to be in a position where you have to cold pitch, because if you're cold pitching, you have a high likelihood that you don't understand the other person's pain, and that whatever you're saying, you're just kind of rolling the dice, hoping that whatever pain they have, you have a solution for it. But if you just listen to someone's pain first, you can reverse engineer it and tailor your pitch to solve that person's problem. So let's say you have a default pitch that you always go to, right? If that default pitch doesn't solve a person's problem or their challenges, then they're not going to care about it. So the persuasion formula works really well on the fly, especially because as you listen to someone's problems, you're going to be able to say, okay, I can see how I can kind of tweak my pitch so that it's very specific for that individual. And even though your solution may be very complex, it could be, solve a lot of problems for a lot of people, you just want to say the things that that person needs to hear in order for them to make a buying decision. You want to listen 80% of the time, and then 20% of the time you want to be talking, right? And that's going to enable you to position your offer, your idea, or whatever it is that you're selling as a solution. And the persuasion formula, again, challenge, solution, why. You just want to follow that simple formula. What's the problem? How do you solve that problem? Why is it important for that specific individual? And how are you better than everybody else? And when you use this formula, what's actually magical that happens is that even though you know that you're pitching and you're very intentional with listening and then delivering a solution after you listen to all the person's problems, people psychologically in their head, they're going to feel like they came up with the solution all on their own. Meaning once you pitch your solution, right, after listening to all their problems, they're going to think like, if I'm a smart person, I should buy whatever this person has because clearly they're solving my problems, right? And this is the illusion of control, where the other person feels like they're in control of the situation. They feel like they're making all the power moves. They feel like they're getting all the information from you to make a buying decision. But in reality, you're listening most of the time and giving them what they want to hear. And that's assuming that your product or service is actually good and can solve their problems. And then from there, what's going to happen is that if you do this all correctly, you're listening to the person's pain, the prospect is going to close themselves, meaning now that you position your product or service as the solution to the problems that this person is facing, they're going to want to buy your product. And you're totally reversing the situation, because before, salespeople had to just keep pushing product down someone's throat. And now you're reversing it, where you're asking questions 80% of the time and listening and talking 20% of the time. And now from there, once the prospect sees that your product or service actually can help them and add value to their lives, they're going to say, how do I buy from you? How does this work? What are the next steps? So from there, pitching and closing becomes much easier, because you don't have to force someone to buy into your product or service. They're going to want to buy it because you did all the steps correctly in listening to their pains and providing a solution to get them from point A to point B. Now, there are always going to be people who say, Patrick, I'm just starting out. I'm just a startup. I don't even have a product or service. I don't have any credibility. How do I sell? And the reality is you can actually sell a promised solution to prospects, assuming that you really deeply understand their problems and that you're basically promising them and saying, hey, you have this problem. I know I can solve it. I don't have any credibility, but trust me, I hear you, I see you, and I'm going to work my tail off to make sure this problem is solved. A lot of times people will say no, but a lot of times people will say yes, right? And this especially works when it comes to coaching or consulting, because there isn't necessarily a physical product people see. It's just a promised solution to solving the other person's problem. So if you're selling coaching or consulting, or if you think you can build a product fast enough, like an MVP, then you can say, hey, I understand where you're coming from. I know the problem very deeply. Here's my proposed solution. And so from there, you can pretty much sell something that doesn't even exist to somebody. And a lot of times they'll actually buy it, because if they really felt like you heard them and they really feel like they trust you and you understand their problems, they're willing to pay you money to solve their problem, right? Essentially, they're basically hiring you to solve a problem. That's like work for hire. So again, if you don't have any credibility, there are ways to convince people to pay you for an idea, and that is in the form of a promised solution, but that can only exist if you understand what their problems are. Now, moving forward, there are always going to be situations when you're pitching your product or service or idea where people are going to have objections, right? And that's pretty common, because no matter what you're selling, people will always have objections, because there are a couple unknowns that they need to identify and things that need to be known in order for someone to make a buying decision. So the trick here is that from a mindset perspective, you don't want to think as objections as something bad, right? A lot of times people, when they meet objections, especially salespeople, they'll be like, oh, wow, this person's dumb, or they don't understand my pitch. Didn't they hear me the first time, or something like that? In reality, you have to think of objections as a blessing, because when a prospect gives you an objection, they're basically giving you data on why they aren't able to say yes right away. And so by people giving you objections, you're getting more data. And as you collect more data, you might realize that a lot of people have the same objections. So once you find a solution to those objections, you can clearly articulate how you can solve that objection, and then people will get over that hurdle. And then from talking to prospects moving forward, you can tailor your pitch so that these objections don't even come up to begin with. So again, whenever you have objections, people are just telling you why they can't buy right away. So if you can solve those objections and think of it as a blessing, because this is people giving you free information. And once you're able to solve it, then you can tweak your pitch, and then you can overcome those objections and help people make that buying decision. And really the job of sales is just to help people make the right decision, right? Because people do want to buy things that help them, that bring value to them and help them get to where they want to go. And a salesperson's job is just to really see if there's a fit for that person to buy your product or service or not. And if there's not a fit, that's totally fine. Then both people move on. But if there is a fit, you got to handle all the objections. You got to pitch your product or service in the right way. And you listen to the person's pain and then help that person make a confident decision to buy whatever it is that you have so that they can move forward with their lives and get to wherever they want to be. And that's really the job of sales. It's not about being a snake oil salesman. It's not about tricking people. It's just about helping people and adding more value to their lives and helping them make the right decisions. And the last thing I want to share with you when it comes to pitching is that people love to buy, but they don't like to be sold, right? And so this form of pitching, as you can see, it's very non-high pressure, and it's basically just helping someone make a buying decision, removing all of the objections, really listening to their problems and providing a solution. And if your product or service isn't a real solution to that person's problem, then you probably shouldn't be selling it to them anyways. But assuming your product or service is actually good or good enough to actually get the job done, well, you want to make people feel that they love buying from you, and they're going to tell their friends like, wow, this guy's really great and their product or service is really good and you should buy from them, man, right? That's how the word of mouth spreads. So again, people love to buy, but they don't like to be sold. And that is basically the mindset you want to have whenever you get into that pitching mode. So with that said, that is everything we are going to cover when it comes to pitching and the persuasion formula.